Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode is a big one. This one has a lot of reveals regarding what's going to go on with the series, and it just has a lot of big lore reveals in it. So first and foremost, this episode actually starts off with Gary and Ethan, who have been recurring characters. They've just picked on Fred for the most part throughout several episodes, and we haven't really got to learn their dynamic outside of just picking on Fred. That's mainly been their whole thing. But yeah, in this episode we do find out what exactly it is their whole dynamic is, and as it turns out, they are kind of sort of friends, but not really. The episode establishes pretty quickly that when they're not making fun of Fred, they're making fun of each other. It establishes that they just moderately tolerate each other. Case in point, the two of them go up there to train their calves for soccer, and they go up on a mountain called Mount Diablo, which they're climbing around on, and Gary is wearing lederhosen while Ethan is making fun of him for wearing it, and Gary has the team soccer ball in a little net pouch on his belt, and of course the two of them just have a bit of a back and forth about the whole thing, and they have a bit of a back and forth about how Gary's wearing lederhosen, and the two just kind of just make fun of each other. But and of course they also point, and of course when they get to the top of the mountain, Ethan asks if he can bond with the soccer ball, but of course Gary makes fun of him, pointing out that apparently he kissed had him full on makeout session with the soccer ball while they were on the way up there. But as they're actually just making fun of each other, it's at this point where we actually see the monster of the episode, Dark Lilith, which appears out of nowhere, promptly attacks Gary and Ethan, and then proceeds to swipe the soccer ball from them. And they then proceed to fall off of Mount Diablo, with Dark Lilith telling them to never come back, because as long as it's there, she's going to make sure that nobody who trespasses on the mountain, and that the mountain is under her protection. At which point the episode begins. And of course Fred immediately goes to the hospital to go and check on Gary and Ethan, because he's kind of oblivious to the fact that they're not really his friends. And sure enough, he goes to investigate, and they immediately ask why Fred and the rest of the gang are there. But Velma merely points out that they're mainly there to check out the mystery. And of course, then asks them to explain what happened. And of course, Ethan goes on to explain how they were climbing Mount Diablo when they were attacked by some monster, and they lost the team soccer ball, and then proceeds to blame Gary for it, which Gary points out it wasn't his fault, and that the bag just broke, and that it hurts and that the fact that Ethan is saying that to him hurts his feelings. So Ethan proceeds to apologize, but then Gary makes a whole bit about how he's not really offended, and he just wanted to make Ethan look ridiculous. And Ethan then declares that he hates them. So it just establishes that they just constantly make fun of each other. But Fred points out that he's more than happy to do it, pointing out that they're his teammates and friends, and that he's more than happy to help out. But now Gary and Ethan quickly point out that they're not friends with Fred and don't even like him. But he merely plays it off as a joke and pulls him into a hug, which since they're currently injured and recovering from falling off a mountain, he winds up injuring them by accident. At which point they all pile into the mystery machine and proceed to head out to Mount Diablo, and of course Fred points, and of course Velma's immediate reaction is that they should give the monster a medal once they get there, pointing out that knocking Gary and Ethan around is kind of a big accomplishment. But Fred merely points out that they're not that bad and that they mean well. But the gang all chime in at the same time, pointing out that no, they're not likable people, like, at all. And they openly point that out. But Fred asks Velma if she believes him, and that there's some sort of mystery afoot, and of course, and Velma agrees, pointing out that regardless, they're going to be going to a place called Scorpion Wells, and that regardless, they're going to have to go there anyway. They're going to have to go there anyway, and that they don't really want to hang out in there any more than they have to, and of course, they do eventually arrive in the town of Scorpion Wells, which is in the middle of a desert, and also notably just in the middle of nowhere. And if Shaggy puts it, when they get out, it looks like a place where old trailers come to die. It's essentially just a giant trailer park posing as a town. But of course they get out and start looking around, and they are. And as they start looking around trying to find people, various residents then proceed to come out and immediately start accosting them. And of course they come out. Their faces are all covered in bandages and goggles, and they quickly surround the gang. At which point, the seeming leader of the group proceeds to walk out of the town's town hall, and they all proceed to unmask, and of course the leader of the group, and of course the leader of the town, the mayor, I guess mayor of the town, named what is her name? Granny Snaggletooth, I think is her name. But yeah, Granny Snaggletooth. She introduces herself and says and welcomes them to their quaint little town, and then proceeds to introduce them to the rest of the gang, including a man named Ugly Jimmy, which as we quickly find out is misleading because Ugly Jimmy isn't ugly at all. I should openly admit that. Scorpion Wells is established to have a inverted sense of beauty and good looks. So they think that they all look handsome, and that Jimmy, the actually handsome one, is an ugly abomination. But and of course Daphne is immediately smitten with quote unquote ugly Jimmy, and immediately starts flirting with him, which Fred does not take kindly to, and immediately breaks the two of them up and starts to start asking questions. And of course, it's at this point where Granny Snaggletooth does in fact point out that she is in fact that Ugly Jimmy isn't exactly the best to look at, and also it's established that in addition to that he has a deep silky voice, which only furthers to add to his frustration that he thinks he's quote unquote ugly. And of course, when Daphne tries to compliment him on his good looks, and he merely cowers in fear, telling her not to look at him because he's hideous. And yeah, it's established that poor Jimmy doesn't fully understand that he's actually handsome. He doesn't understand that in the slightest. But in any case, at this point where Velma actually breaks all of this up and proceeds to ask Granny Snaggletooth about what she knows about Mount Diablo. And immediately her attitude changes, and she insists that the gang should stay far away from Mount Diablo, pointing out that it's cursed and forbidden, and that nobody is allowed to go up there. But of course, Velma points out that they need more information to go off of. So Granny Snaggletooth points out that they're actually going to be holding a big tire fire, which in the middle of town, and that they're more than welcome to get their answers there. And of course they then proceed to sit down, and then of course later that night they do in fact sit down around the tire fire, which Daphne does point out is quote unquote lovely, but also her face very much implies that she's not having a good time. And of course Granny Snaggletooth, who is currently cooking what I believe are lizards, but she's cooking lizards on a stick, and licking them to make sure they taste right, but she merely points out that the tire fire actually makes their skin feel all oily, and then proceeds to ask them if they would like some of her fried lizards, which of course the gang immediately turned down. So she eats them all herself, telling them to suit themselves. So yeah, Scorpion Wells, just kind of one of the weirder towns in this place. But of course, it's at this point where Velma actually decides to ask them about the history of what's going on, and of course, at this point where Granny Snaggletooth points out that they're not allowed to go up there because it's a forbidden cursed island, a cursed mountain, and that they should really much leave the place before trouble happens. And then proceeds to grab a shotgun and declares that she's going to go get some more meat, and then leaves. At which point, Ugly Jimmy actually decides to tell the gang what it is they want to know. He then proceeds to tell them the story of Dark Lilith and how the mountain is guarded by her, and how they're not supposed to go up there because it's forbidden. They're not allowed to be up there. And of course he points out that Dark Lilith actually guards the mountain from trespassers, and nobody is allowed anywhere near there because of that. And of course, right on cue, Dark Lilith immediately shows up and starts attacking Scorpion Wells. She starts destroying trailers and homes and a whole bunch of other things, and of course just causes a massive panic attack, including knocking the burning tires from the tire fire just everywhere. And of course, Dark Lilith tells them to stay away from the mountain lest they want to know what's coming to them, and then proceeds to knock over the town's water tower, which lands in the fire pit, and everybody scatters. At which point Grace Snaggletooth comes back, very infuriated by the fact that they let Dark Lilith come into the town, and because they were talking about the mountain, and she clearly thinks that they infuriated Dark Lilith, and insists that the gang leaves, and before things get ugly, as she puts it, and of course the rest of the gang then proceeds to pile back in the mystery machine and gets ready to leave. And wonders what exactly it is that had them all, why Dark Lilith actually wound up attacking the town, and also why they were so hostile. But it's at this point where they hear a voice from the back seat who tells them that it's because they're afraid of Dark Lilith. And proceeds to arrive, Fred then proceeds to stop the mystery machine. And the person that was speaking from the backseat tumbles out of the darkness, and we do see that it's actually Ugly Jimmy who had stowed a ride. And of course Fred immediately wonders why exactly it is he followed him, but Ugly Jimmy immediately points out that he heard their story about how they're trying to get their friend's soccer ball back, and insists that he's going to help them find out what exactly it is that's going on, and he's more than willing to be a guide if it means that he'll be able to help them out, but also points out that he hopes he'll be helpful despite his hideous deformities. At which point Daphne decides to actually set this record straight on the fact that he's actually handsome, but Fred stops her before she can point that out, and just thanks Ugly Jimmy for his help. At which point they then proceed to drive up to the mountain, where they then proceed to start scaling it, and Jimmy then starts leading the charge and leads them up the mountain, where Velma then discovers a strange claw that she proceeds to analyze and notes is interesting, while Shaggy and Scooby attempt to actually climb the mountain, but immediately grab a bush that breaks in their hand, and they immediately tumble down and almost fall off the cliff and land in a tree, and they merely respond that mountain climbing is hard. But Gaze then proceed to continue climbing up the mountain when then they start looking, and Jimmy starts looking around and tells them to watch their footing because it's a very long fall. And sure enough, right on that cue, they actually wind up falling through the ground and into a large cavern, which we quickly find out is actually an old mine. And they start looking around, wondering exactly why it is that this is here. At which point Ugly Jimmy is grabbed by somebody from the darkness, and they immediately and the gang immediately jumps in the shadows to rescue them. And of course, they start wrestling with each other, as we find out, because it's completely pitch black. But eventually Jimmy is able to light a lantern, and it's revealed that the person that they were attacking is actually a woman named Boron, who gets her name because she's a boron miner, and that's her mine. And what we find out is that apparently she's just been living on the mountain for a very long time, and that's her brain's a little bit scrambled. She doesn't fully understand what exactly it is she's looking at, and gets confused very easily. Of course, it's at this point where Velma asks why she attacked them, and Boron merely responds that she was trying to protect her man because she didn't want anything happening to him. At which point it's revealed that she actually has the soccer ball. She painted it up to look like Wilson from Castaway, but she does have the ball. But she does have the ball sitting on a pedestal with a trench coat, and tells her beloved that she's not going to let anything happen to him. And of course, it's at this point where Fred immediately tries to take the ball from her. And of course, even though Velma insists that they're not going to actually take it, and then proceed to, and then once they actually calm her down, the group then proceeds to try and figure out what exactly it is, how exactly it is that she came across the soccer ball. Even pointing out that if she is indeed Dark Lilith, that she should have her costume on her, and the fact that she has the soccer ball is very strange. But she merely but of course, is this point where Boron points out that she isn't Dark Lilith, but does mention that she knows the story of Dark Lilith, and also insists that she just found the soccer ball somewhere. She doesn't really explain how she got it, but she did find it. But in any case, it's at this point where she actually reveals the legend of Dark Lilith and what the story actually is behind her, and explains how she actually lives on a boat in a mountain. And proceeds to explain, and right on cue, Dark Lilith then proceeds to appear from the hole that the gang fell in, and then points out that since they didn't heed her warning that she's going to have to going to end their lives, so she starts ripping out support beams and collapsing the mine with them in it. They do all 7 of the heroes do eventually escape, but in the process, Dark Lilith tries to attack several members of Mystery Incorporated, and it's at this point where Ugly Jimmy winds up wrestling with Dark Lilith, telling her that she's not going to hurt his friends, and that's at this point where he immediately gets knocked down the mountain and seemingly dies. And of course, it's at this point where everybody starts panicking, and they immediately get into hiding spots to actually get away from Dark Lilith, who eventually quickly looks around after dealing with Jimmy, and is unable to find them. Eventually leaves, unaware that she came very close to finding Shaggy and Scooby, who were hiding behind cactuses. Which should be painful, might I add. It should be, but it's not, because it's a cartoon. But in any case, after pulling themselves together and lamenting on the fact that Ugly Jimmy sacrificed themselves so that they can finish solving the mystery, they then proceed to ask Boron if she can take them up the rest of the mountain to where Dark Lilith lives, pointing out that that's what Jimmy would have wanted, and that they shouldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. At which point Boron does indeed take them to the top of the mountain, where they discover, against all odds, a sailing ship. Just in the middle, just on top of the mountain, they have no idea how it got there. And Fred even comments that that's one hell of a mystery for them to solve. And of course, this is this point where they actually wind up sitting down, where they actually go on board the boat, and do go on to thank Boron for her help about how they actually found her. But by this point, she's just completely gone, and it's unclear what happened to her. She just disappears, and as far as my knowledge, according to my research, she just never appears in this episode after that. She never appears again. She's just completely gone. But of course, no, it's unclear where she went. But deciding to press on, Mystery Incorporated begins to board the old ship, and they do know that it's Spanish in design, and wonders where exactly it is it came from, and Shaggy even points out that the ship that is a little bit odd that it's just in the middle of the mountain, and how it actually got here. At which point Velma appears with the ship's manifesto, and what we find out is that it's made by the ship's captain, Fernando de Aguirre. And she then proceeds, and she points out that it's in Spanish. But since she passed on her Spanish, she's more than able to read it. And then proceeds to go on to read it. And we discover what exactly happened to the people aboard the ship. And first and foremost, what we find out is that the ship was owned by the Spanish conquistadors that founded Crystal Cove. And it then proceeds to tell the story of how they founded Crystal Cove. Yeah, what we find out is basically the story goes is that Fernando and his team and his crew were going around searching for treasure, and they eventually heard tell of a very valuable treasure that, as Fernando puts it, was worth a king's ransom. So they go, and of course they immediately go to sail it, and the treasure that they find is a large crystal sarcophagus full of black pearls. And noting that it's most likely going to be very valuable, they do decide to steal it and stow it aboard their ship. But what we quickly find out, and Fernando even states this in the thing, but apparently an evil entity, as he puts it, is actually living inside the crystal sarcophagus, and it drove them to perform horrible atrocities. And he explains that it's almost as if the crystal sarcophagus sought them out rather than the other way around. At which point, and it's at this point where, of course, they go on a conquest, conquering various territories, driving out the indigenous people there, and just plundering them for riches. And eventually, Fernando realized that they couldn't keep going on like this, and quickly realized that they would need to get rid of the crystal sarcophagus ASAP. So he then proceeded to bring it to the shore that would later become Crystal Cove. And he reveals that he actually buried it deep underground, using what we find out was a completed Plant Spirit disc. And using the Plant Spirit disc, he charted which he explains is alchemical in nature. He then proceeds to go on to explain how they use it to bury the crystal sarcophagus as far away, as deep underground as they could go, in order to ensure that nobody would ever find it by accident. And then he proceeds to explain how the reason the Plant Spirit disc is broken up into 6 pieces is because he broke it up to keep people from finding it, and explains how he scattered them all around the world while leaving the 6th and final piece aboard his ship, which is revealed to have been towed by him and his crew to the top of the mountain. And he also explains how he set several traps to keep the piece of the Plant Spirit disc safe, pointing out that he couldn't let it fall into evil hands, and he couldn't risk somebody finding all the pieces and letting the evil entity out of its sarcophagus. So of course with that he then that does seem to indicate the revelation of the cursed treasure, but also implying that there's something deeper going on there, and I'll get to that in a minute. But in any case, after reading all of that, Mr. Incorporated quickly do realize that the Fernando de Aguirre is the person who founded their town. Realize that whatever he was scared of, he split up the Plant Spirit disc to hide it, and they quickly realized that, and after reading that, they quickly realized that the piece of the Plant Spirit disc is somewhere on the ship. And Shaggy, of course, points out that they need to find it before Dark Lilith shows up again. But Fred stops him, pointing out that it doesn't seem like it's going to be that easy, and then points out that his trap senses are tingling. And sure enough, he drops a coin from his pocket, and it winds up setting up a large claw trap, which of course Fred realizes is only the first of many, and points out that seems like it's trapped out the wazoo. And of course, the rest of the gang would then proceed to wonder how they're actually supposed to find it. But Fred merely points out that that's actually the easy part, and that's the fact that the ship is completely trapped means that they know where the piece is, because all they gotta do is follow the traps. And sure enough, Fred proceeds to follow the set traps through several corridors, and some of them are actually quite advanced for the time, I should mention. A lot of them are like technology that Fernando shouldn't have had, but it seems like they're a little bit advanced for the time, which feels like a continuity error, but they are fun traps, so I'll allow it. But in any case, eventually they do arrive at the captain's quarters beneath the ship, and Fred points out that it seems like the coast is clear and that they found everything they need. And that it seems like the coast is clear as far as you can tell, and proceeds to open the cabinet. But it's at this point where Dark Lilith appears and immediately attacks the gang, and in the process throws Fred into the cabinet, smashing it open and revealing the 5th piece of the Plant Spirit dish, which Dark Lilith quickly snatches up and thanks Mr. Incorporated for helping it find the piece, and before flying off and trying to leave. But in the process, she accidentally trips over Scooby, and winds up dropping the piece, and the rest of the gang immediately get into a race to follow after her, and Velma quickly lands on top of Dark Lilith and tells Fred to grab the piece, which he does. But it's at this point where Dark Lilith throws Velma off and immediately snatches the piece of the Plant Spirit disc and tries to fly away, but Velma winds up lassoing her with a piece of rope from the ship, and winds up wrapping it around the mask with Fred's help. And this causes Lilith to not only be stuck in place with the ship, but because Dark Lilith is currently attached to the ship, she winds up pulling it free, and it winds up tumbling down the mountain. And of course Fred tells the gang to buckle up, and at which point Scooby and Shaggy immediately grab the wheel of the ship, and Shaggy tells Scooby to turn left, but because of the way Shaggy words it, Scooby gets very confused as to which direction he's supposed to go. And eventually Shaggy just decides to do it himself and help. And sure enough, they do proceed to tumble down the mountain with Dark Lilith in tow. And eventually after going down the mountain, they eventually crash land into Scorpion Wells, and wind up destroying their town hall, which I should have mentioned is just surrounded in propane tanks, which promptly blow up. At which point they then proceed to drive into the town sign, and the ship winds up being completely dismantled on account of the ship A being very old, and B, they run into a metal sign. Of course, it's going to shred through that thing, but of course, this results in the ship being broken in half, and Dark Lilith and Velma land on one side, while the rest of the gang fall on the other side, and it's at this point where Velma recovers herself, pointing out that's going to hurt quite a bit. But then she notices Dark Lilith is trying to walk away, and it's at this point where Velma winds up smelling a familiar smell. And upon closer examination, discovers that Dark Lilith's costume is ripped, and discovers that the person under the mask is actually Heart Dog Water, and then proceeds to chase after her and calling her by her first name. And of course, Marcy does in effect unmask herself and does say hello. But Velma wonders why she did it, but then realizes that she knows exactly why. Mr. E made her, and of course, Marcy does indeed begin to clarify about what her evil plan actually was, and explains that not only was she looking for the piece of the Flying Spirit disc, but she quickly found out that it was guarded by traps and couldn't get in herself, so she tricked Gary and Ethan into coming up, knowing full well that Fred would try to come to the help of his teammates, and that he would convince the rest of the gang to come with. And explains that because she needed that the reason she did that is because she needed Fred's help disarming the trap so that she can get the piece of the Planet Spirit disc. And also proceeds to explain how she more or less repurposed parts of her Manticore costume for first unmasking to create the Dark Lilith one, which is how it's able to fly. It uses the super helium that Marcy found and invented in that episode. But and of course, Velma wonders what exactly it is that's going to happen now. But at which point, Marcy does indeed give Velma the piece of the Planet Spirit disc, pointing out that friendship should come before doing a job. And but Velma points out that because of that, Mr. E is going to come after her. But Marcy merely tells Velma that Mr. E is going to have to catch her first, and then tells her that she'll see her around. At which point the rest of the gang eventually recover from the other half of the ship, and eventually do meet up with Velma, and they do ask what exactly happened with Dark Lilith, but also note that Velma seems to have a piece of the Planet Spirit disc now. And of course, Fred was assured that she would run off with the fifth piece of the disc. But when they ask her where Dark Lilith went, Velma merely lies and says that she flew off somewhere and doesn't know where she is. At which point they proceed to pile back into the mystery machine and proceed to place the third piece of the Planet Spirit disc in the box that they have for the other pieces. And it's at this point where they get ready to leave. And a recurring bit is that Granny Snaggledoodle has been flirting with Shaggy, and she does indeed come over to him and asks him if he wants one last kiss to further the road, which he immediately turns down. At which point they hear a familiar voice, and of course they then proceed to turn around and discover that Ugly Jimmy isn't Ugly Jimmy is actually a much better description of him now, because Ugly Jimmy, who is now going by Handsome Jimmy, as it turns out survived his fall from the mountain and is revealed to have become so horribly injured and disfigured that he is now considered handsome by Scorpion Well standards. And does ask Daphne what she thinks, but Daphne is now repulsed by his newfound bad looks. So she almost starts vomiting, but Fred takes this with open arms and does tell Jimmy that he looks good, much to Jimmy's joy and pleasure. At which point the gang then proceeds to pile it back into the mystery machine, and now realizing that that counts all 5 of the 6 pieces of the Planet Spirit Disc. Scooby points out that they have 1 more to go. But Daphne then muses that maybe they won't so much seek aid out as it will be the other way around, and they then proceed to drive off. At which point, we actually meet Fernando de Aguirre as a ghost, and he merely ominously states the word Nibiru before cackling madly, turning into a skeleton and then proceeding to disappear. That's how the episode ends. So this one, I said, is a big one, because this one reveals the origin of the Planet Spirit Disc and why it's broken up into pieces, explains the origin of Crystal Cove and how it got its name, and also it implies that there's a supernatural element in this series, which I should mention they have done a couple of times before, especially in the movies, but they have done a couple of these where they have indeed shown off the the mirror, where they have indeed shown off some supernatural elements, and they've been arguably well received. Obviously, the supernatural elements in the series where they first appeared. Obviously, the whole thing with this series is that it's always been mysteries and that they've always unmasked guys in costume. But at one point, they just decided, hey, what if we made the ghosts real? What if we made the ghosts and goblins real supernatural creatures? And more or less, that's just been a thing that the series has done periodically on and off throughout. So, yeah, and it's an interesting. So yeah, if there is indeed a supernatural element, that's going to be interesting. Because I mean, it was implied, considering the fact that in the episode Bodega of Horror. Obviously there was the fact that the guy who ran the curio shop, I forget his name, but he explains how the cheese told him to come there, and it's implied that the Planet Spirit just told him. It's implied that there's some sort of supernatural element here, and now they're finally clarifying what that supernatural element might in fact be. So I'm interested to see what that's going to be like, but yeah, I'm interested, and I'm also interested what Nibiru is. That's an interesting thing, but in any case, I'm also interested to learn more about the Crystal Sarcophagus and what exactly that is, because obviously it's buried underneath Crystal Cove, and the Police of Planet Spirit Disc is supposed to chart a path to that. So I'm curious how that's going to go. I'm curious how that's. We know that most of the Planet Spirit Disc has been recovered either by Mystery Incorporated or the old Mystery Incorporated, and I'm curious how that's going to play out. But yeah, for the time being, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this review, then be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Be sure to check out my Patreon if you want to help support the show. I mainly use it to fund projects, so be sure to go check that out. And also be sure to go check out the videos linked in the end screen as well. They're based on what you've already seen from me, and based on what the most recent video is. I have no idea what they're going to send you in advance, so just go check one out and just find whatever. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!